Embarking on a journey of discovery, the interplay of being and non-being in Laozi's philosophy. In this episode, we delve into a central and profound concept within Laozi's philosophy, the interplay of being and non-being. This is not only the theme of Chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching, but also key to understanding the entirety of Taoist thought. We will immerse ourselves in the fountain of Laozi's wisdom and interpret how he used concise yet profound words to reveal the subtle and powerful relationship between being and non-being. Chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching is more than just a collection of words. It offers a deep insight into the nature of life. Let us begin with the original text and slowly savor the profound meaning behind each character. 30 spokes converge upon one nave. It is the empty space that makes the wheel useful. Mold clay to make a vessel. It is the empty space that makes the vessel useful. Cut doors and windows to make a room. It is the empty space that makes the room useful. Therefore, being provides advantage, while non-being provides function. Laozi tells us here that the wheel can turn because of the emptiness at the center of the axle. A vessel can hold things because of the emptiness within. A house can be inhabited because of the space between the doors and windows. These seemingly simple everyday things contain the most fundamental truths of the universe. The existence of being provides convenience, while the space of non-being is where its true function lies. This content may sound simple, but because it mentions the words being and non-being, it deserves special attention. In Laozi's book, there are 3 uses of being and non-being. The first usage is the mutual arising of being and non-being. We mentioned this in Chapter 2. What does it mean? It refers to the existence of something. For example, a flower that did not exist in the past comes into being and blooms. This is called being. After a while, the flower withers and disappears, returning to non-being. Thus, the mutual arising of being and non-being refers to the existence of something, which is the first usage. The second usage is the interplay of being and non-being mentioned here. How does this interplay work? For example, you have a piece of paper that can be used for various purposes, but it must be blank to write on it. If the paper is filled with content, you cannot use it for writing. Therefore, the root of utility lies in the interplay of being and non-being. This interplay refers to the existence and utility of something, which is called the coordination of being and non-being. The first and second concepts of being and non-being are relative, while the third is more unique and appears in Chapter 40 of Laozi, which states, "All things in the world come from being, and being comes from non-being." This simple sentence mentions that being arises from non-being, implying a sequence from non-being to being, which is particularly noteworthy. We will discuss Chapter 40 later. Here, Laozi uses 3 examples to illustrate the method of generalization, using a cart, a vessel, and a house as examples. When reading, everyone should notice that the first sentence we say, when it is empty, it has a dwellings use. The word cart was pronounced che in ancient times, and only later during the Han Dynasty was it pronounced ju. Because ju, chi, and shi rhyme, many people studying Laozi say that he uses rhyme in many places, which is not easy to study now because many sounds are ancient and different from today's pronunciation. Today, when we study Laozi, it is more important to understand his philosophy. As for the words he used, there are, of course, very profound places because Laozi was a very knowledgeable person. So here we simply analyze. The first situation is that there are 30 wooden strips gathered around a hub on a wheel, and it is the emptiness at the center of the axle that gives the wheel its function. The last sentence obviously turns a layer deeper. In fact, the emptiness at the center of your axle allows the creation of an axle or wheel made up of 30 wooden strips. The cart is not only hollow in the axle, it also has empty spaces on the cart for people to reside. So he turned a layer deeper here, which is not entirely the same as the following 2 examples. Why did the ancients say to insert 30 bamboo strips into a hub? They said that there are 30 days in a month, so they used 30 spokes as a reference, representing that the ancients' lives and the calculations or laws of nature always tried to coordinate. So what is said here is that when you have the emptiness at the center of the axle, you have the function of the cart, and you should understand it this way. The second is called molding clay to make a vessel. When it is empty, it has the use of a vessel. The ancients made utensils from pottery clay or clay, shaping and kneading the clay into the shape of a vessel. When you shape the clay into a vessel, the middle must be empty. If the middle is full, it can only be a decoration and cannot function as a vessel, unable to hold things or water. So what's the use? So just having a vessel is not enough. You also need the empty space in the middle to be able to use it. The third example he gives is chiseling doors and windows to make a room. When it is empty, it has the use of a room. This situation is quite special. Why do you need to dig open doors and windows? Because in ancient times, many places in the north lived near the mountains, and if you were by the mountain, you would dig a hole, and that's where you could live. So there was an ancient official called Sikong, who was responsible for digging holes in the mountain, which is what we call building a house today. This was an official position, and Confucius once served as a minor Sikong in the state of Lu, responsible for deputy construction. Today, when we talk about building a house, we are not talking about digging what kind of holes. In ancient times, it was like this, chiseling doors and windows to make a room. I first start here by the mountain and dig a door, dig a window, and then continue to dig inside, emptying it out before people can live in it. Otherwise, if the inside is full of mountain walls, how can people live? So this is to say that if you have a house with doors and windows, you still have to hollow out the inside to let people live. This is a clear difference between ancient and modern houses that needs to be explained slightly. So here we can see that Laozi uses three examples. One is the cart we ride in, the other is the utensils we use to hold things, and the other is the house we live in. These three things must have an empty space inside to play its role. So you say that if something is just there, it represents having a certain condition, which is called being advantageous. But if there is no empty space, its function cannot be exerted. So when it comes to strength, it means what you possess. Having strength alone is not enough. You also need to use it, and to use it, you need to empty it out. Just like if you have a cup, if the cup is full of water, you can't pour any more wine or tea, no matter how good it is. You must empty the cup. After it is emptied, the cup has various uses, and you can consider how to use it as needed. So this reminds us to always empty ourselves so that we can adapt to the timing and conditions and show our greatest ability. So people live in the world, no matter what industry they are engaged in, they all hope to have the right use. So how should this use be manifested? It is also what we often say, you need to be able to empty yourself and keep yourself in a state that can adapt and apply. So the last sentence talks about having it for profit, and not having it for use, which is the concept of having and not having. The concept of having and not having in Laozi is repeated here because such a concept is easy to confuse. The first kind is the mutual birth of having and not having. A flower did not exist before, and after a while, it appeared, and after a while, it disappeared. So from nothing to something, from something to nothing, this is the mutual birth of having and not having, which can be seen on the same thing. The second kind is the cooperation of having and not having mentioned here. How does it work? It is necessary to strive to use two words, you have something, which means you have a certain advantageous condition, and it is possible to do some things, but you must be able to let it not have, to remove the real situation inside it, to empty it, to make it void, so that it can play its role. So having and not having work together. These two are the basic thoughts. So the third kind of having and not having, let's talk about the answer first, is not really having turning into not having turning into having, because that is impossible. You can understand having turning into not having. How can not having turn into having? Strictly speaking, any nothing cannot become something. So Wang Bai's explanation is very wonderful. Wang Bai said that what Laozi said about nothing is intangible, and what he said about having is tangible. So in the most primitive situation, the intangible is nameless, and only after it becomes tangible can it have a name and be named. So back to the first chapter of Laozi, his punctuation is very clear. The beginning says nameless is the beginning of all things, and having a name is the mother of all things. Why is it nameless? Because it is intangible. Why is it named? Because it is tangible. If you want to grasp it, you have to name it, and then talk about desire and non-desire. So we repeatedly emphasize that the first chapter of Laozi cannot be punctuated with having and not having, and the reason is here. Because at Laozi's stage, from his writings, it can be seen that he did not have the concept of complete nothingness. If it is complete nothingness, how can it become something? This is not magic. At most, it can only be said that it was originally intangible and later became tangible, which you can grasp. The original intangibility is not equal to nothingness, which is a very key concept in Laozi. So what have we learned from this episode? What we have learned from Laozi is that he used three metaphors, talking about carts, utensils, and houses. He said that if you want these three things to play a role, in addition to having them, you must also let them enter a state of nothingness. If he remains empty, you can bring out his role. If it is full, it has no other use. We are the same. When we usually learn any knowledge, it belongs to a certain state. I have obtained this knowledge, but how to use the advantageous conditions you have obtained? When using it, you must be flexible. The word flexible is interesting, which means that you cannot use your brain to think that this thing must be like this, not like that. We must keep pace with the times, and at the same time, after flexible application, practice makes perfect. Often empty ourselves, so that the abilities we have can play out in various special circumstances. Just like when you drive, you start by following the rules completely, and later you may enter a state, that is, no longer limited by too much, and can adapt to changes, to achieve the best effect. Especially in contemporary Western existentialism, there is a philosopher named Marcel, who specifically mentions a concept that modern people are very familiar with, which is to have is to be owned. Having something means you are also owned by it because you are obsessed with it, so if a person has too much, he may sometimes forget who he is, forgetting who is the subject of life, forgetting that his life itself is not limited by any conditions, has infinite possibilities, and is free. So when we study Laozi, we can understand it from various angles, and when we encounter key concepts like having and not having, we must think carefully and grasp it. So I would like to ask, from what you have learned today, can you imagine what kind of thing you have after it, which represents having favorable conditions, and how can you try to make it void so that you can give full play to its role? Can you give an example to illustrate? I would like to hear your opinion.